Welcome to Soundbreaker. In today's episode, we're talking to Natalie Jacobs, who is a founder and a CEO of Equalizer Consulting. And Natalie, thank you for joining us today. And for our listeners who might not be familiar with you, if you don't mind, just please introduce yourself and just a bit about your background and what do you do before we really dive into it.
Absolutely. So I am the founder and CEO of Equalizer Consulting, and that is a consulting agency specialized in music metadata and rights management. It's something I've been working with my entire career. I spent a long time with the majors, working specifically with Warner Music Group in various capacities. And so now out on my own and trying to spread the good word about metadata and rights management to as many people as possible.
Wow. So is it fair to call you the metadata doctor?
I've been called many things. My husband calls me a metadata evangelist. Someone recently called me a metadata maestro. So, I've heard many terms.
It's needed. You know that. We both know. We're going to get into it. It's kind of the minute I read the word metadata, ding, 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 a million questions came through my mind.
Of course.
What got you started in the music business? What was the interest? Is it something that you were influenced back in your early teenage days? Like, you know what? This is what I want to do in life. Music industry, this is the path I want to take and carve.
Right.
What
Um,
influenced that path?
yeah, my dad was a really big music guy. He and I used to listen to music all the time. He always used to joke he would put me to sleep in front of a speaker, just like tapping on my back to the rhythm of whatever he was listening to. So I think music was always just a very big part of my life growing up. But I didn't necessarily plan to get into the music industry. I was actually hoping to go more into film and television. And after I graduated college and I moved to Los Angeles, I sort of ended up in music. This was coming right out of the age of Napster and ended up interviewing for a position in copyright, which, having spent several years playing around with Napster and doing all of those things, it was kind of ironic that I ended up in a position where my actual job was to protect the copyrights and make sure that people were getting appropriately paid. So that's really how I ended up in music. It wasn't necessarily a plan, but I never wanted to leave. Having ended up here, I'm a lifer, I think.
I mean, well, definitely, I'm going to get into the metadata thing in a bit, but let's talk about your path and your career and what you accomplished. You worked for Rhino Entertainment,
I did.
and yes, and let's talk about that for a second. And how did that influence your path of handling right management?
Right. Well, Rhino is an absolutely fabulous label for those who aren't familiar. The way they handle catalog releases is absolutely best in class. And I think it was such an enjoyable part of my entry into the music industry was also working with music for classic bands and classic artists. And a lot of the things I did listen to when I was growing up, and my dad would listen to. So getting to work on those releases was amazing for me. The other thing that I think Rhino does so well is they really do optimize the catalog in many different ways. They look at different ways to package it, different ways to do combinations of track listings and box sets. And I think it was such a beautiful place to work. And working in the clearance side of things, it was a lot easier, I think, than in frontline because a lot of the information was already established. So when you're doing re-releases or you're working with classic musicians, a lot of the data or a lot of their copyright information, it's already there and it's established. The harder part, of course, is working with old contracts and things that might have been written in the 80s and trying to reinterpret what they intended by that. But it was a really great place to work. And I really enjoyed my time there. And it was setting up a great foundation for me for the rest of my career.
The not jumping off the path, but I know Rhino, one of the big companies back in the day. They used to do a lot of these infomercial CD compilations late at night and commercials. Am I right?
Yes, that is actually
Yes,
that is where I started. I started with a lot
they
of
were
the
huge back then. That's right,
absolutely.
massive.
It was the
Yeah.
Time Life and
Yes.
those
Yes.
late night sort of Casey Kasem's 50s and 60s and stuff like that. The kind of thing you might fall asleep on the couch
Did they
and
own this catalog? They own all these So long as they were just licensed or
No,
they
it was
own
a
a lot.
mixture between licensing. So, there's a lot of things within the Warner catalog that Rhino was able to tap into. But then,
Mhm.
as is the case with any, compilation of that kind, there will be times where you do need to license in masters from
They were
other
massively
places.
successful in that.
Yes, absolutely. And I still own a lot. I still own a lot of them in
They
my
they
house.
they released a lot of interesting box sets. I remember, really
Yes,
interesting.
absolutely.
Yes. So you mentioned earlier in the conversation that you were in Warner Brothers. You worked for Warner,
Yes.
and you had worked at variety of, there were many different capacities, and one of them was the licensing manager. What challenges did you face when you were doing the licensing at Warner?
So when I first started my career, we were very much analog. We were, selling CDs and vinyl and things like that. And as my career progressed, then the advent of new media, what we were calling new media. So ringtones, ringback tones, digital downloads, and then YouTube came onto the scene. And so as the first 10 years of my career, that shift, that significant shift from everything being very physical to suddenly this,
Digital.
flux of digital things being on the marketplace was very complicated because of course it changed what we had to do for a licensing perspective.
Cool.
Also, a
Yes.
lot of the licensing stuff goes over to the royalty teams, and instead of having these sort of very tangible amounts that we were paying, suddenly we were seeing reporting of these fractions of a penny that were coming in from streaming, and the sheer volume just grew exponentially. And suddenly we're dealing with spreadsheets that have a million lines of pennies that we were trying, or micro pennies that we were trying to assess and figure out where they needed to get paid to. So one of the biggest challenges for me over that first 10 years was really figuring out how to adapt to this shift, how to adapt to the concept of things going up on YouTube without having ever been on a release schedule, having to deal with the sheer volume of what was coming back and how to channel it to the right place to be paid out, and how to do that quickly, because of
Hmm.
course the amount of information coming in felt like it just sped up over the course of those years because of the digital influx. And that was a very challenging thing to do, was figure out how to deal with it at scale.
Hmm. You also, I mean, you did two jobs, I would say, tech
Right.
and training programs at Warner.
Yes.
What was the training program?
Well, it really started for me. We got a new licensing system, and you know, I think I was considered someone who was fairly tech savvy. And so I was asked to jump in and really work with the tech teams, understand the training that was going to be needed, and just keep working through with the business teams so that they could have a good transfer over into this new system. Because it was really a migration from 4 or 5 old systems into a singular system that everyone was using. And
Hmm.
that was very difficult because any kind of technology migration is going to be kind of sticky, especially when you've got that many systems involved. So there was a lot of change management involved. There was a lot of, hand holding from people who had been using the same system perhaps for many, many years into this new platform that was doing things completely differently. So that's what really got me started into doing training and writing up solid documentation as to what's needed to move from place to place and from system to system. Because I think that when somebody is trained and have good access to the information, something they can refer to, they can see what data standards are expected of them, they have naming conventions to apply, and they really have everything fairly standardized, it yields much better outcomes. And so I've continued with that as I've moved on into other places within Warner or beyond Warner, really thinking about the right way to make sure that people have the access they need when they're going into a new platform or a new system, and everyone has a shared understanding of the expectation.
As a senior director at Warner, what was some of the biggest data issues you dealt with?
Right. So I was brought back to Warner in 2019
Hmm.
to build this data operations team for the publishing group. So that's Warner Chappell, and also their production music arm. And I think it was really interesting to me because I'd worked a lot with publishers over the course of my career up until that point, but then directly supporting a publishing group, everything I thought I knew about publishing, suddenly I was like, maybe I don't know as much as I thought I did. And having to really relearn a lot or expand my knowledge on a lot. So for me, that was one of the most interesting components of moving into that space. And
Yeah.
then, of course, diving into the metadata issues and figuring out what needed to be done and coming up with a strategy for how to do that globally at scale. It was definitely exciting to sort of dig in and learn so much along the way. And it was a wonderful team over there at Chapel who were very supportive of the initiatives that we were working on and trying to tap into. But yeah, that was really my foray into being completely data focused.
Is that part of the project, the 400K ACID data set?
Well, that was that particular project was really, I don't know if anybody has a really strong understanding of how complicated the matching can be between a recording and the musical work. But the matching components of that, even for a company that owns both sound recordings and musical works, the matching of those two things together can be really complicated. And that was something that my team was tasked with because I had experience both on the recording side, working for labels, but also now on the publishing side. And so if you think about the center of a Venn diagram, that's where my team was sitting for this particular project, was to try and assess the data for the sound recording to the musical works that were really owned by the company. And it was something that I know had been tried various times over the course of my own career at Warner. And this was the first time we were actually able to tap into it because, sitting in a sort of a neutral space, we were really able to gain access to all of the data and put parameters in place to gather it together. And you'd think it would be something fairly easy to do, but it's strangely not. It's not necessarily the easiest thing for any company in the music space to match sound recordings to musical works, whether or not they own both sides or they only own one of the sides. It's a strangely complicated, but perhaps shouldn't be complicated part of the music industry.
Do you think the metadata issue right now is one of the biggest hurdles that the music industry facing?
It's certainly one of the bigger ones, in part because metadata is being created so quickly. New metadata is being flooded into the music industry daily, just millions of lines of data. And we don't have necessarily really strong and robust parameters in place yet, nor agreement from everybody as to how that metadata should be captured, should be shared, should be, set up in the first place. And I do find that we spend a lot of time looking backwards and trying to fix the metadata problems that already exist or bad data quality that already
So it is
exists.
outdated, I would say, the way it's being handled.
A lot of it is really outdated. But I always feel like prevention is better than the cure. If we had a situation where we had agreed upon processes on how we were going to put data in, and we were educating the right people, including
Yeah.
independent artists, on how to put that data into the right systems, I think that would be far less overwhelming than constantly be looking back and trying to clean up bad data that's already proliferated. But not only that, we do have it at a global scale because, of course, music is a global industry.
Yes. Correct.
And every territory has slightly different rules and regulations. They have different legislation in place. So you have to think about how do you approach that on a global scale? And it really is quite an overwhelming problem.
So I think tech will have to take a major role in kind of fixing this problem. In your opinion, how would you fix it? You've been working with metadata for a long time and you understand
Right.
it's been, beside the fact that it's being outdated, it's a big mess.
It is a big mess. And I think that one of the ways that I would love to see is more proactive parameters put in place for new metadata that goes into any system. So
Correct.
it's, stop the bleeding, so to speak. But if there were more training protocols and parameters put in place by labels, by distributors, by other things like PROs, or in the US, the MLC, and more. And MLC does a fantastic job of education, but by the way, but like it's very difficult, especially for the volume that's coming in from independent artists and songwriters, for them to actually know what they're supposed to put in and how they're supposed to put it in. I find that a lot of the independent artists don't even know what some of the core identifiers are for their musical assets. So you look at something like an ISRC. I've spoken to plenty of independent artists who don't even know what an ISRC is. And that is one of the few core identifiers that we do have in music. So if you're thinking about the tens of thousands of people who have no label representation, who do not, have somebody telling them the best way to go about entering their metadata, that is something that we are critically missing. Furthermore, if you even look beyond the independent space and you look at even labels or publishers, a lot of times the data entry does fall to somebody who perhaps doesn't know a ton. Maybe they are entry level. Maybe this is their first job. Maybe they're an intern. And ultimately they are tasked with putting in some kind of metadata, but they don't understand where it goes from there. And so they aren't sure what questions to ask or whether or not they are spotting something that isn't correct.
Especially now with AI music generators happening, and that will, where this money, if somebody wants to license somebody grabbing just songs from the internet, from YouTube, and just generating, doing their own ML training for the music and coming out with thousands or tens of thousands of new songs that being released out there, and with brand new metadata, which is being trained on all the music that had its own existing metadata, but nobody knows how to even detect this metadata or kind of find out who does belong to what, how do we pay. So I think with AI being involved now, it's becoming more complicated if nobody fixes it. But you said one thing, you said, how about we stop the bleeding? Stop the bleeding, meaning find a solution. Find a solution right away for any new song, whether it's independent artist, unknown, somebody, doesn't matter what part of the world they're from, or somebody with a big label, major label, they have new music going to get released. Any music being generated needs to go through this steps. I think there should be some kind of regulation. So this way they'll be stamped like a certificate or some kind of approval. And that's it. So this way cannot be changed, that metadata. It doesn't matter. Metadata is metadata. Somebody was telling me the other day that, hey, well, catalogs is being sold. Correct. Catalogs being sold, like you sell a car being sold. It doesn't mean you change the VIN number on the car. You're not changing the brand of the car or the model. There's a new owner. That's it.
Right.
But so the song, the metadata doesn't change. Oh, I own the song, so I'm changing the writers or the composers. No. Even if you own the publishing, you own the rights, the writing rights and all that, it doesn't matter. These credits should be on. Yes.
They should. And actually publishing is a very tricky part, because when you have more than one writer,
correct,
immediately the data becomes quite fragmented. You have 4 writers, and if they are representing their name slightly differently, or their publishing entity, or maybe they're not fully agreed on shares. And a lot of times that does happen at the time of release, where writers don't even have all their data completely locked down. It can become very, very tricky, because once it's already out there, it's a lot harder to, make sure everything gets updated and fixed versus making sure it's done.
So what are you telling me? There's a lot of money sitting there and they're just sitting there in publishing.
There is a lot of money in what we call the black box. There's a lot of money that is sitting there. It's difficult to strike a balance, because you want to get the data as good as possible at time of release without making it difficult to release things. There's a lot of conversations that have been had over the years about how to do that, because a lot of times, even early in my career, when I was trying to make sure all the clearances were in place for a CD, there were definitely times when things had to be released, when shares still were being figured out and there was still discussions or maybe some kind of conflict or legal hold happening, and certain things did get released. And then you had to keep tracking them down and keep working on it to make sure it was resolved. But ultimately, it's already out there. And it's so much harder to make sure everything's properly updated once it's already out there in the world.
Interesting. Natalie, you managed NBC Universal Big Migration Project. What is that?
Right. So that was actually, I did some project management
Hmm.
training around 2018 when I was impacted by a layoff. And I did some project management training, and I really moved quite seriously into tech for a few minutes there, because it was a global SAP transformation program that I was working in. And I was one of multiple project managers involved with this. And it was really interesting to see how a company of the size of NBC Universal was handling a global shift in a technology update. And so the biggest challenge, I think, for something like that is you have so many stakeholders globally who all have different timelines they're working on, different priorities they're working on, who all you have to get them to agree on a date.
Yes.
You have to
Yeah.
get them to agree on a timeline. You have to get them to agree on, when something's going to go live and any impacted downtime and all those kinds of things. When you look at music, it's a fairly big industry, but it also
Yes.
feels very small. You go into something like NBC Universal and all of the different components that are involved in their industry, and it suddenly feels a much bigger scale. So it was a great experience from getting to learn how to deal with very conflicting stakeholder management and really flexing some of those project management chops that you have to really dig into to get a company of that scale to agree on something.
Equalizer. I
Yes.
mean, there's the movie, or was the show a long time ago. Equalizer, somebody comes in and clean things up,
Right.
fix things up. Is that what inspired you to to come up with the name Equalizer Consulting? That's your own
No,
brand, your own company.
yeah, it's my own brand. Actually, it was really looking at my husband's DJ mixer.
The Equalizer.
So, right, yep, it was really about creating equality and boosting and balancing and equalizing data. And of course, there's a million wonderful little puns that come off of the name as well. But really, it's about creating that balance between the music, the creativity on the business side of a music
What was
career.
the main driving inspiration to start your own business in that field? Like, you know what, this is what I want to do, and I think it's needed and it's missing. And with
Right.
my knowledge and all everything that you gather throughout the years.
It was in large part a testament to the power of a network. Because when I was preparing to leave Warner and I was reaching out to my network and just looking for opportunities and, doing the whole, hey, if you hear of something, think of me, and having some people in my network say, actually, we could really use your expertise to help with this project. And after speaking with a few people who had sort of asked me for some time, realizing that there was the possibility for me to offer my skills and expertise in this space to a lot of people. And that actually is really exciting because a lot of people don't think about the data operations. They don't think about how data flows through their systems or how their people need to be trained on data or, what data actually means in some, form that can mean so many things. So it really inspired me to take my expertise on the road, so to speak,
Yeah.
and allow people to tap into the data operations that they may not be thinking about. It should be in the forefront when whether you're a startup or you're an independent person or you're something more established, it really should be in the forefront of your operations.
Correct.
And a lot of people don't necessarily have those internal positions. They haven't thought about the need
Hmm.
for an internal data operations type person. And that's something that I can offer because sometimes you don't need to do much more than actually just make sure you have the slate set up correctly in the first place. Organize your junk drawer, right? Make sure that you know where everything is supposed to go. You can maintain it beyond that, absolutely, but you want to make sure you're setting off on the right footing.
A lot of your clients at Equalizer Consulting, more majors or independent labels or production or publishers or also artists.
To be honest, it's a little mix of everything.
Everything. Uh-huh.
Just because my career has been so varied and I've done so many things,
Hmm. Hmm.
I can really pivot in many different directions. And the way that data can be applied regardless of where you're coming at it from. And I've seen the label side, I've seen the publishing side, I've seen production music, I've seen all of those things. Depending on where you're coming at it from, I can really pivot and use the same concepts and applications regardless of what you're putting in front of me. So I'm currently working with some smaller independent artists. They need so much help. The more I talk to them, the more I realize how much help they need and how much they don't know. But they're also really willing to listen and have somebody guide them. So I think that's a fantastic thing. But beyond that, honestly, I enjoy working with anybody who wants to have a data forward strategy. So I'm finding, I think, more interest in the sort of smaller to mid-sized companies at this time. But really, it's anybody who wants to put their data forward in their business.
What is a common misconception people have about the music industry, you would think, Natalie?
Right now, I feel like there's a common misconception that streaming is the answer to everything. Streaming royalties can be quite sparse for a smaller artist in particular. I've had somebody contact me because they were confused and they felt that they had been paid too much. And I asked how much that was, and they said it was $35. And that's the reality for a lot of people in the independent space, especially, where $35, like, well, something must be wrong. That's too much money. And that's horrible. Back when I started and would do an album, you would have mechanical rates for an album that were equating to, at the time it was probably like, I think 7 cents or something like that
You can't even compare. You can't
per
even
composition.
compare.
Right.
Yes.
And now to get that 7 cents, you need who knows how many streams to get to that, especially for a publisher where it could be split up many, many times. So I think that the misconception is that we just have to chase the streaming success, but I prefer to tell people to look at the whole picture, look at how placement in a TV show or something, that some kind of licensing, if a game or whatever, might influence the ability for your streams to have more success.
Yeah.
Similarly, playing live shows and collecting your email addresses for your fans can possibly help you also gain better streaming success, but also might help you gain a placement on a TV show because you never know who's there. There might be a music supervisor in the audience. So really looking at everything in combination and how one area can influence another area and create increased success in those areas. But just chasing streaming alone is not likely to, solve everybody's problems.
You've been through it all. You've been through the physical era and the transformation. And I've been through it myself from a record label I had, going from physical to digital. You've seen the transition, the difficulties, the chaos, and then the acceptance of it. And yes, the money is not going to be ever the same, ever the same. No, not even near it. Where do you see, I think, in my own opinion, again, we coming to an end, but there's the beginning of the end, and there is a new era of music consumption. In your opinion, where do you think we're pivoting towards to, or we're leaning towards? Technology always dictates the music business we're in.
Right.
And it doesn't matter what we have to say. In the physical world, there were real estate buildings of stores and warehousing and trucking companies and factory and packages and printers, and so many businesses were attached to it.
Right.
Billions and billions and billions of dollars vanished, disappeared. Not even a trace. Ask your kid. You have
Right.
kids. Have you heard of Tower Record? What is that, Ma?
Right.
Ask you.
Right.
Is that a new app?
Absolutely.
No. So there'll be a time that will happen. I would 100% will say that. Maybe a couple will stay. They'll be like just more of a novelty, but they'll be gone. And where do you think we're going towards music consumption? It's going to change. Streaming not going to be the same. It's going to be a new way of consuming music.
I agree.
And I feel, not to interrupt you,
No, go ahead.
the music, the video gaming industry I feel is dictating that a little bit. How we going to consume content in general, whether it's visual or audio, but it's going to be all mixed together.
I think that the channels that we can now consume music have broadened so much. We used to have to very thoughtfully go to a store and have to buy the
Correct.
CD or the cassette or the vinyl or whatever it was, having perhaps heard it on the radio or heard it at a friend's house and been like, that's pretty cool, I'm going to go buy it. Now everything is so overwhelmingly available at the touch of a button that I
Yes.
think that people are actually seeking experience again, because the
Yes.
experience is what we're missing. I think that
100%.
streaming has made us such passive recipients of
Yes.
music. It's just there. You don't have to
Yes.
think about it. I
Yeah.
look at my own kids and they fall into the Gen Alpha category, that we don't actually know necessarily how Gen Alpha is consuming music from a data standpoint,
Mm.
because they're consuming it on my credit card. So, it looks like me. But ultimately, they are, at least in my household, they are seeking an experience in a lot of ways. My kids want to buy vinyl. They like going to the record store. They like
Mm.
looking through things. I don't know if that was a bad idea on my part, because it's very expensive to teach them to do that, but they do like that. And it brings me a lot of joy to see them open up the liner notes and look through the lyrics and actually engage in it in a physical, tangible
Mhm.
way, and then get up and go turn the LP over and look at the other side and have that experience where they're fully engaged. Because it's different from just hearing music in the background when you're in the
Mhm.
car or when you're walking around. It's very different when you are having that tangible experience of having to go buy something, have to actually dedicate time to put it on the player and flip it over when it's ready. And it's very different. And I do think that the experience is part of why vinyl sales, despite streaming growth, vinyl sales has also continued to grow. And if you
But do you think this is the path we go in? Is this the future?
Not necessarily. I think that
The experience is part of it, though.
yes,
But I don't think it's
it's the
going to be the physical
experience,
experience.
not
Yes.
necessarily vinyl. I
Yeah.
think that whatever it is able to bring us, that sort of engagement and that experience, I think that's going to be really critical, because people do still want that. People still want a community around a
Yeah.
fan, being a fan of an artist that they love. They still want to have the excitement of going to a show and meeting other people who are also fans of that artist, and buying the merch, buying collectibles, having, almost like a badge to show their fandom. I
Yes.
think that those are parts of the experience. Maybe being able to play as the band in Fortnite or Roblox, or, some of those gaming opportunities that have really sort of risen over the last few years. Maybe there
Hmm.
will be growth in that. Maybe there will be growth in virtual concerts. It doesn't necessarily have to be a piece of vinyl, but I do think that's what people are seeking. They're seeking more experience and connection with the music over the more passive listening that you might get through just streaming it.
You also a teacher. You
Yes.
still teaching at Point Blank Music School, or not yet?
Yes.
Or you still teaching?
Yes, I
How
am.
does that influence in your work? Can we talk about that?
Of
And
course. Um,
yes.
I started teaching because it's something I've actually been doing even in my day job. Even
Hmm.
when I was at Warner, I was the go-to a lot of times for teaching things about the industry or teaching things about metadata. And so it was a fairly obvious transition for me. So I teach part-time at Point Blank, and I teach the music industry course. And what I love about it is being able to see the light bulb turn on from these students who are aspiring musicians or aspiring industry professionals, and them sort of realize, oh, there's so much more to this than I had assumed. And being able to actually see them think about their metadata or think about a part of the industry that they'd never considered. And now maybe suddenly they are more interested in an area that they never even thought about before.
Hmm.
I had a student recently tell me, she goes, your class has really inspired me to get all my numbers correct. And by that, she meant her identifiers. She meant making sure she had gathered all of her ISRCs and her IPI information and her ISWCs for her songs that she'd
Hmm.
registered. And it was really exciting to her. And that's what makes it fulfilling, because
Yes.
ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, with the education component, most artists in the independent sector don't know what they don't know. And even though it's, maybe it's only 15 students at a time, but if I can tell those 15 students,
Yes.
hey, go focus on some of these things as you start your music career, it it's making a little bit of difference, one student at a time.
My question to you, how do you manage all of this? You're a wife, which has had its own categories. You're a mom, its own categories and duties, an entrepreneur, business owner, self-employed, many different categories, and a teacher.
Right.
So how do you balance all of this, without losing your hair like I did?
Yeah, extreme time management, I would say. No, it's something that I actually do rely. Everything goes on my calendar, and my
Yes.
calendar is color coordinated. So if it's something relating to my business, I know it's in dark blue, and if it's something relating to a specific client, it might be in a certain color. If it's something relating to the kids, it's orange. So I do spend a lot of time making sure that I block everything in my calendar, and that I set aside time for the different tasks that I need to take care of. Some of those might be
Hmm.
monthly or weekly or daily, whatever the situation is. But I'm not going to lie and say it's easy, because it's not.
No.
There's a lot of balls thrown in the air at all times and trying to figure out which ones I need to catch. And there are definitely times when you realize, oh, wait, hold on, I'm completely backed up on XYZ that you have to take care of. But ultimately, this is something I've just really enjoyed going into over this last year, and really having the opportunity to build the business, as stressful as that can be, has also led to being very available for my kids when I need to be. So there's a great amount of balance that can come with it as well, and just really thinking about my own goals and what do I want to do. It's been a really great experience for me to sort of work through that.
Well, very inspiring, something to learn from. Natalie, looking back at your journey,
Mm-hmm.
what would you give some of the newcomers who's going to be inspired by this interview when they listen to it and watch it? Going to be inspired by you, obviously, and say, you know what? I want to take the same path. I want to carve my own path, make my own mark. What advice do you have for the, I would say, new seekers in the
Right.
music business? Yes.
I would say try different things. It's there's so much opportunity and there's so much transition, and the music industry is constantly reinventing. So be open to looking at things and exploring new opportunities, or like digging into information on new companies or new trends that are happening, because it's shifting and it shifts all the time. And I'm very grateful, especially over the last year, to have just been able to spend some time and make that part of my own goal setting, is to
Hmm.
look at what's available and what's actually happening out there, because I feel like it prepares me for whatever is coming next, and it allows me to try new things and continue to grow. So don't feel like you don't have the opportunity to grow. There's always new things happening in this industry, and what you thought you were going to do or what you thought you knew doesn't mean you have to be in that forever. There's always the possibility to cast your eye broader and see what else is going on, and maybe give that a try too. So
Yes. Before we wrap up this inspiring, interesting interview and informative, I would say, anything you would like to mention that you're working on that's going to be coming up in the next month or two, or
yeah,
this year at least, please.
of course. So, something I've actually been working on this year as a result of various conversations with artists and students, and people in the independent sector, not in companies, is just the need for understanding what their metadata baseline is. What are they doing well? What are they not doing well? What are they missing? And so I've actually just got it up on my website just for September. It's at a launch price right now. It's a metadata music data checkup, right? It's where I will myself, or to the people I work with, can go through your data and see, is it good? Are you missing some things? Is there a big gap here? And at least give you a report that's sort of a place to start off with. So where do you need to focus, right? At least take that, and you can do with it what you will. If you want to, go do all the research yourself, absolutely, but at least get you thinking about it as an independent musician. And hopefully these are the steps towards educating and helping people chart that better path to stop the bleeding. So it's something that I've been putting together over the last few months, and I'm pretty excited that I'm ready to go. So.
Amazing. Well, you heard it first at Soundbreaker with Natalie Jacobs. Natalie, I want to thank you for joining us today. And this concludes today's episode of Soundbreaker. Please make sure you follow us on socials and stay tuned for our new episodes. Thank you and see you.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to share the Soundbreaker podcast. And if you are joining us on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time.